everybody. Thanks for joining Think Theo Season 5. And I have a very special guest today. He's kind of a big deal. And I got to be on his podcast recently. His name is Mathew Blades. He is an award-winning radio host and speaker. And I'm going to let him talk more about himself. But thank you so much for taking time to join me and talk about grief and loss and things that can help other people.
Yeah, look, you and I unfortunately know too much about that subject. And as I said to you when you were on my podcast, the only reason that it happened to us is so we can help somebody else when it's their turn. So here we go.
I believe that 100%. And it didn't start out that way. Excuse me. It didn't start out that way. You know, when it first happens, your first instinct is not, I'm going to take this and turn it into something to help somebody.
Yeah, right.
You know, that
You're just trying to get through it.
That kind of comes later. And I heard Gary Sinise talking about that. You know, he lost his son, and I heard him talking about how you can either go ahead and sink into the corner or the floor and not get up, or you can make a decision to take what you've learned and help somebody else that's in their sinking time.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, right? And I think it's an even better reminder for people that are right in the thick of their grief right now. And I know it feels like nothing's going to change and it's never going to get better and you're always going to feel this way. But there's two people here, both Theo and me, Mathew, that are here to say it's not always going to be that way. And I can't tell you how long it's going to last, but I can tell you that it's not going to be forever. And well, with the caveat, right? We should put a little asterisk on that. It won't be forever if you put in a little bit of work yourself, if you put in a little bit of effort yourself.
Yes, I wouldn't want anybody to have to go through it, but the fact that we are alive, dying is part of life. And we're all going to experience loss, whether it is, it may not even be loss to a death. It could be, loss of a pet. It could be loss of a job. It could be loss of a marriage. It could be having to move to a different state. It could be loss of connection. Connection is just so important. It's vital to survival. And when we lose a connection, we just feel, we start, like I was reading on your website, we're all in a state of dysfunction.
Yes. Yeah. And I love how you articulate that because it isn't just always about people dying. Look, grief can show up in relationships too, right? When that person that you had that special feeling for, that high regard for, lets you down, right? Those are moments of grief as well. And so they do. Grief shows up mysteriously all over our lives and throughout our lives. But as far as I can tell, and I'll just use death as one of the examples, right? And it could be death of a relationship, death of a pet, death of a person, I'd love to hear what you think about this, Theo. I don't know if there's anything in the world that will teach you more about who you are than losing something, than grief, than death. I feel, and I've said this since my father passed away way back in the mid 90s, that I think death is the greatest teacher of my life. It has taught me more about who I am, who I want to be, who I want to be for others, who I want to be for myself. It's just been an incredible teacher. And like we said earlier, that's not how it started, but it is how it is now. And, when you can get to a stage, and I don't know if you're here at this stage of the game yet, but like when you can look at that moment that was so impactful in your life and say, okay, thank you. Like I see why that happened for me, and I see what the lesson in that was. But I would love to hear what you think about that. Do you think death is an incredible teacher? And you're a teacher, so you got to be careful here.
Yeah, exactly. No, I've always said that grief is a great filter. If there was anything that was wrong in your life before, grief's going to bring it to the surface. If there was anything that you had shoved under the rug before, it's going to bring it out. Grief just has this way of filtering our life And yes, I would have never dreamed 6 years ago that I would have written a grief book and I'd be out speaking to grieving people and that would be my passion. I would have never dreamed that. And I've always said, people will say God won't give you more than you can handle, but that's not really even in the Bible. God may give you more than you can handle, but it's still part of his plan. And you won't see that at first. And you may never really accept the plan, but it is his plan. And hopefully, years later, and it's different for every person, hopefully you will see what God's plan was in that. My mom was taken the year before COVID. My mom was completely deaf. COVID would have killed her because people wore masks and she read lips for communication. So I think to myself, God, what a gift to allow her. She got to go to heaven before she had to live through watching my dad's mobility decline and his health decline and COVID. Excuse me.
Yeah. You're
COVID
fine.
was, and it at the same time, COVID created isolation for so many people and disconnection. And looking back, I realize now that the whole story of my parents, my mom and then my dad taking his life, I see now how they're helping so many people, even in their death. And so that's that Romans 8:28 verse. God will work all things together for good for those that love him. So he takes the worst of our life, the worst thing that can happen, a death, and he can turn that into good. But at first, a fresh griever, they don't need to hear this. But this is something we're letting you know is going to come in later down the road, on that road of hope.
Yeah. Well, and this is a good discussion for people that, I don't know who typically comes to your podcast, right? Are they people that are fresh in grief? Are they people that are, maybe a year removed or 2 years removed from it? But and let's bat this around a little bit. But for me, the single greatest thing you can do for yourself is allow yourself to feel all of the feelings right now and just allow what's coming in to come out. And I remember when you were on my podcast and you talked about, your dad who was so faith centered. And in those moments after he had that accident that took his wife and your mom, he was cursing God and what is all this? And why is this here? And I remember this impactful story that you shared with me about you called your therapist and you said, my dad's going off here. Like, what do I do? And I'll let you share what your therapist said because I think it's so poignant.
She texted right back and said, let him say the words that he needs to say because those are the words that carry the weight of his pain.
Mm.
And you don't know until you've been in his shoes. You don't know how you're going to grieve and how you're going to try to cope. But that was his coping mechanism, was to say the words that I didn't even know my dad knew, much less to say them. And that was how he, got his pain out. And I think as a society, we shy away from that. We immediately think, oh no, they're losing it. But really they're just sad and they're just grieving in the best way they know how.
Yeah. And it's important to note that it isn't always sexy. It really, I mean, grief is messy and it's sloppy and it's gross and it's uncomfortable and it takes a long time for grief to be a peaceful, beautiful process. It is just sloppy, I think is the best word that I can offer people because, look, you've experienced death and grief in your life. I watched both of my parents die. I watched my best friend of 30 years die. I know a thing or two about losing people that are very, very close to you. And unequivocally, what I can tell you is that for a while, it's just going to be messy. For a while, it's just not going to make any sense. And the best thing that you can do is just keep getting up every day and just do what you can and miss them and talk to them and find them in hummingbirds, find them in butterflies, find them in nature. Like there's all kinds of cool ways that you can connect with people. And one of my favorite things to talk about with folks who have lost somebody is what's your relationship with like for that, or what's your relationship with that person like in death? Has it changed? Have you allowed it to change? Have you allowed that relationship to be softer? Maybe you lost somebody who was kind of a jerk to you while they were around. And now you've got these conflicting, confusing emotions that are showing up. Like, I didn't really, this person wasn't very kind to me, but now they're gone. And now I'm feeling a certain way about it. Just feel it, go through it, let yourself have that experience. But most importantly, start to tiptoe towards a new relationship with that person in death. And I don't know how much you talk to your mom and dad still. I know it's been 5-6 years throughout this whole thing. I still find myself having conversations with my father, and he died back in 1996. So it's a long time ago.
I was going to ask you how old you were when you lost your parents, and for you to tell more about that, and then
Yeah.
to follow it up with what type of counseling, did you have to get into some counseling to help you through? Because I tell people
Yeah.
all the time that counseling, finding the right counselor that is trained in your specific type of loss is critical to healing.
Yeah, my grief journey starts well, if you include some of the things that you talked about early on in our conversation, right? We moved to a new state when I was 12. I started a junior high at a brand new school. I started high school at a brand new high school.
Mm.
And so in a lot of ways I had to grieve the loss of losing some friends, and this is of course way before social media. So once you moved away, you just weren't connected anymore. But I was 23 when my father died from something they call sudden cardiac death, which means the first day you find out that you have a problem is the day you die. And it happened in our family's home on our family's deck. I was there with him, and my brother was on the phone with 911, and I was picking him up, and I was laying him on the ground, and I was trying to deliver CPR and do everything that I had seen in a movie or on a TV show to try and bring him back. And we were just very unsuccessful. So it was a pretty life altering moment to be that close to the front lines and see your dad in one moment completely fine eating pickles and carrots and celery and dipping them in ranch dip, and the
Oh,
next moment you're pumping on his chest to try to save his life. So 23 for me was the first mark where I lost my dad. And I didn't do any counseling as a 23-year-old. In fact, hindsight's 2020 now, and I can look back and I can go, well, I could have done something a little different there. I chose to pour myself into my career. I was just getting started in my radio and television broadcasting career, and it was really starting to blossom. And so, in a lot of ways, I moved away from home. I moved away from my mom, my brother, my sister, and I just poured myself into work. I probably drank too much. I probably experimented with drugs a little bit more than I needed to in those moments. But like so many people, it's like you're just trying to do anything you can to get by in those moments. And I recognize that was not a great strategy. But I will say this, even though those things are true, the one thing I did do a very good job of was I talked about the experience a lot and to anybody that would listen.
that's great.
And yeah, it was really important for me to like, what there's this saying I heard a couple of years ago. It's somebody said, "We're not gossiping, we're processing."
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Right? And that's what it was for me. And when you have an experience like that, is as violent as that scene was, where you know like I said, one minute you're on the deck and you're having a great conversation, and another moment he's fighting for his life, like that violent episode, it shakes you in so many different ways
Mm.
that it takes a while for you to kind of get your head around it. And I'm sure you're similar, right? Like, how do you get your head around this farming accident that takes place? Because you just can't. You just can't get your head around these things. And so talking about it was one of the things that I believe I did a good job of and still do to this day.
Yeah, I wish I could use you as an example to everybody out there. I'm just like, I love talking about it. I love I love sharing what happened because it's getting it out of me. And yes, you're opening yourself up to a lot of, that well-intentioned advice from people, but I'll be at a book event, and of course I'm sharing my story, but then I'll be somewhere where I don't even know these people, they don't know me, and I'll strike up a conversation with somebody, and I'll say, well, I've written a book on grief, and they're like, oh, and then I start to tell them the story. My parents were married, because I just think that their story is worth sharing. And it's probably like you probably feel like your dad's life is worth sharing. So in that, and how we kind of get to that life part that we get to share is telling, about their death and what we experienced as their child.
Yeah, look, I love my dad. I love my mom. I love my best friend. I love to talk about them. And when people die, you know this, and anybody else that's in your podcast experiencing your own loss, you know this. After about 3 or 4 months, everything disappears. People stop saying their name. Nobody calls you anymore to find out how you're doing. The casserole stops showing up at the front door. And as his son, as their son, as his best friend, I'm not ready to set their story down. In a lot of ways, I feel like it's my responsibility to keep his memory alive. And, that's one thing we talk about a lot on my podcast when we get into these interviews that are around grief and loss, is we say, probably the biggest disservice that we all do, and I'm trying to be really smart about this, and maybe not smart's not the right word, but I'm trying to be really aware of this, is making sure 6 months down the road, making sure a year down the road, making sure 2 years down the road, I'm still saying that person's name to the one who I know misses that individual. I mean, I could probably go 3 years without anybody mentioning my father's name anymore, right?
Mhm.
And pretty soon it will be the same thing with my mom. She's only been gone a year and a half now. Same thing with my best friend. But like, look, in a few years, very few people are going to be saying their names. And I don't know about you, but I think I'm probably going to miss my mom and dad until I'm dead.
I don't understand. I'm members of my own family I've got people in my family that haven't even read my book.
Mm,
And that just blows me away. But here's what I get a lot. Well, you're in that you're just staying in that.
mm,
So that, I've got quotes around it. So I guess that is just grief. I'm just staying in grief, but that's not really the truth. I'm integrating my grief very well. I'm building a new house on the farm where it all happened, but I'm pulling things out of the old farmhouse to put in my new house and bring them along with me. I'm just a feeler. I've always been a feeler. And I think in this society here in good old US of A, we're really good at talking about our feelings, but we're not good at feeling our feelings.
that's so powerful. You're
And
right.
when you said that, earlier about feel, we just need to feel what we need to feel. I have a quote in my first book that says, allow yourself to feel what you want to feel and feel what you don't want to feel.
Mm,
You have to allow yourself that horrible, and in all of my losses, one time that I remember that I fell to my knees in the shower, and you probably have these moments, is when my marriage fell apart. And that wasn't a death. So those of you out there that are going through a divorce, it is very much a grief. You're grieving the life you once had, you're grieving the life you thought you were going to have, and you're grieving the family that you lost in that spouse. So, and they're still alive. So that makes it like almost even harder because you're almost feeling rejection. So that's just a whole nother level. But anyway, there I went down a whole rabbit hole. But
it's fine. I mean, you should talk about disappointment, right? It is that, and we're disappointed when they die, we're disappointed when things end, but okay, now we're here, now we're at that crossroads. How are you going to handle it? And I didn't cope in healthy ways for many years. It took me some time to find myself with these events, and I think that's okay. You don't have to have this figured out right now. But you do, as I said earlier, you do have to walk towards something. You can't just stay frozen. Maybe for a little while, maybe we'll give people a grace to be frozen for a little while, but eventually you really do have to get up and start going, or you enter into what I call this cycle of dysfunction. And once you get on that slippery slope, good luck. it's like a big Colorado mountain. It's only going downhill, and you're on freshly waxed skis. And
Yeah, that's
it's slippery and it's fast.
it will take you down.
Yeah.
So tell me about, we talked about your dad, but you said that you were a witness to your mom's death as well. So she was alive still when your father passed when you were 23.
Yes. Yep. And she just died about a year and a half ago. She
Mm.
had a car accident one day and hit her head really hard, and
Oh,
it ended
wow.
up causing some serious complications. And from accident day to death was 3 weeks exactly. Um, so we were in the hospital with her for all 3 of those weeks, and the last obviously 5 or 6 days um, was more of a hospice feel to it. They have a different term for it when you're in the hospital. It's not called hospice, but it's basically the same thing,
Right.
where they stop feeding you, they stop giving you fluids, they stop giving you medicine. And my mom had this really, really complicated thing where the medicine she needed to save her life was the exact same medicine that was going to kill her. So it was just a real conundrum for our doctors. But look, my mom was so clear on where she was headed. I don't think she had an ounce of fear about dying. I don't think she was ready for it. I don't believe that. I don't think she wanted to go out the way that she went out, but she knew where she was headed. And one of the cool things about my mom and I's relationship is it hadn't always been great.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, when my dad died, I remember having a lot of ill will towards my mom. They didn't have a great relationship, and I could see the toll that was taking on my father. And in a lot of ways, I felt bad for my dad, and I blamed my mom for some of those things. Over the last 5 or 6 years, that stance had softened considerably, and we had become very good friends again. I think if you can say that about of a mother and his son.
Of course.
um, yeah, and when she was literally on her deathbed, we experienced nothing but peace together. And I went from having this relationship with her where it was tough for me to be in the same room with her. I tell people when she would call me, I would just see her name pop up and I would send it to voicemail. I just didn't want to talk to her. And that crap had a negative impact on my body, my mind, my spirit. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I really got serious about forgiveness and really, really doubled down on it and was able to find that peace with my mom. And thank God I did, right? Because when she died, I was holding her hand and hugging her and holding her and telling her how much I loved her and how she was the most perfect mom for me. And even in all the pain that we experienced together, it shaped me into everything that I am today. And I really can't imagine, Theo, my life if my mom and I had made that reconciliation before she passed away. I think I would have carried that with me forever, and it would have been really toxic for me.
Yeah, that it's beautiful what you described, that you were there, and you were talking about how she knew exactly where she was going to go. And so I wanted to talk some about faith.
Yeah,
That's
please.
it's one of my F words that I talk about. We all need some more F
Yeah.
words in our vocabulary.
Faith,
And
forgiveness.
yeah, faith, forgiveness, foundation, friends, family, food.
Yeah.
And the main one in there is faith. And I don't know about you, but I lost mine for some time. And
Mm.
every time I tried to lose it and talk a good game, there it would show back up again. And, it was always there to pull me back up. And my faith, I thought that's it. I'm not going to believe in God. My dad's cursing God, then it's over. But as time goes on, God and the hand of God, you see it working and you just can't discount that. That is the hand of God in your life, showing you that you're on the right path to bring others to him. And so tell me some about your faith and that journey.
Yeah. So I grew up in the church, and my mom and I, and my brother, my sister, my dad, we were, I'll use the word forced because it became that. We were forced to go to church as kids.
Me
And
too.
it
No,
was
there was no choice.
yeah, it was not, yeah, this is not an optional situation. And I tell everybody, I even said this in the eulogy that I gave at my mom's funeral. I said, look, it wasn't a problem until it was, right? Like, it
Right.
was fine until I didn't really want to be going anymore. And then it became a huge issue in our relationship. And I disappeared from God and Jesus for a number of years, maybe close to 20 years. And I'm so and look at this is I want people to pay attention to what I'm saying. Look, I'm so thankful I did. I'm so glad that that relationship severed for a little while, because what it allowed me to do was to look into different religions and different faith and different spirit centers. And I feel like I've got this incredibly well-rounded opinion on faith now and spirituality and what it's all about. And so I'm really happy that it happened the way that it did, right? I got into Buddhism for like 20 years. Thus, my little Buddha hanging out right here. This is a plant that was given to me by my mother-in-law after my best friend died, who his family grew up Buddhist. And I love what I learned about Buddhism, and it's a beautiful, beautiful religion. And so then and this is going to be a cool little wind around. So I give the eulogy at my mom's funeral, and I'm talking about all of the things. She believed in Jesus with her whole heart. There's no question where she is. There's no question that she's up there baking cookies with her mom right now, I think is one of the things that I said.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, after my mom passed away, I started hearing this little whisper to get back into church. And I walked back into a church here in Arizona. This is about 6, 8 months ago or something like that. And I felt so close to her. And I felt so close to my dad. And I felt so close to my best friend, because even though he had grown up in a Buddhist family, he had become a Christian himself. And he had become a believer before he passed away as well. And over the next 3 or 4 months, I kept going back to church because I kept experiencing this joy, if you will. And so this is where I'm at literally in real time at the time of this recording. Is I'm re-examining my relationship with Christ, with Jesus, with Christianity. I'm re-examining, where am I with this relationship? What does it mean for me? And I can tell you one thing unequivocally: when I'm not asking that question about, hey, where is my faith right now? Where is my spirituality right now? I kind of feel like I'm out there wandering around and I feel lost. So I'm very blessed and happy and thankful that in these moments, I'm experiencing more connection.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And, real time, I stepped foot in church for the first time 2 weeks ago Sunday because I was asked to speak
Really?
at church. And I have not been back to church since my dad passed. And I walked in and I didn't have the feeling of being like at home. I just started bawling, crying. And here I'm supposed to be the guest speaker.
Right.
We're in a small church. There's a piano. It reminded me of being in church with Daddy. He was the preacher. I played piano. All the smells, the smell of all the hymn books, everything in this church reminded me of being in church with Mom and Daddy, and I couldn't handle. I was overwhelmed with emotion.
Right.
I had to go to the
Right.
bathroom and like suck it up. But I did feel a lot closer to them there, and I think that's why the emotion, and I ended up speaking and I cried during my speaking, but I was just very open with the audience. I said I haven't been back to church since Daddy died because couldn't I couldn't
Mm.
handle this emotion. I was afraid I couldn't handle it. But I'm here. So now that I've stepped back in, I'm willing to maybe step back in, maybe go with a friend this time and not by myself, and just go back maybe one more time and see how that feels. Because
Hmm.
there's no doubt that those little pit stops every Sunday are refuel for the Christian. We're refueling for the week. Daddy always said, don't run on an empty fuel tank. You need to get back in to church and fill up. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's what he always said. He was going to write a redneck version of the Bible. It would have, he said it would sell too. I'm like, Daddy, I know it
I
would.
believe it would.
You know, instead of like the disciples went into Samaria with Jesus, it would have been like those good old boys, you know.
Yeah.
But
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, right? And it's one of those things that look, growing up, maybe, my mom would have uttered a phrase like, if I told her I didn't go to church for 10 years, she would have said something like, shame on you, right? And she would have made me feel real bad about it.
yeah,
And that's not what people need in grief. That's not what people need in these moments where they feel disconnected. They don't need anybody to make them feel worse about their own situation. If we really believe that God has a plan for us, if we really believe that, then that means it's okay to unplug for a little while too, because it's just part of your journey.
yeah, you don't know what you have until you have lost it, until
Sure.
you miss it. And, my Mimi always said, um, if you questioned anything about the Bible, this reminds me of your mom. My Mimi always
Mm.
said, because she was a spiritual rock, there was no doubt where this lady was going. And she was 100%
Yeah.
certain all the time. She's like, the Bible says it, I believe it, and that settles it. That was that was her saying to everything. If you doubted anything about the Bible or raised a question about God or anything, she'd be like, "The Bible says it, I believe it, and that settles it." And she'd end it with a raspberry. And it sounds like your mom was 100% certain these spiritual women in our lives were a gift.
Yeah,
And
for sure. For
whether or
sure.
not we agreed with their 100% spirituality and pretty much cramming it down our throat, like I was not allowed to miss church unless I was throwing up
Right.
and had a fever.
Right. Right.
And I had to be there. And Daddy, with him being the minister, we were there. Sunday morning, 10 Sunday school, 11 service, Sunday night, 6 o'clock, Wednesday night Bible study, 6 o'clock. So every time those doors were open, we were there because that was what my parents, they wanted me, train your child up in the way he should go. They wanted to make sure that I knew where I needed to go. But I love that you have explored Buddhism and the other, because then that, if you've never done that, you may always question, am I believing this because my parents have forced me to, or am I believing
Hmm.
this because I believe this to be what's truth for my life?
Yes. Yeah. No, look, and that's where I'm at. And this is one of the things that I think religion gets wrong is that they have this idealistic attitude that there's only one way to achieve anything. And that does not land with me. There are days where I feel like Jesus is all around me, and there are days where I feel way more connected to my Buddhist faith. And they both give me something. But the point that I would love to drive home with people is when you don't have your spirit center, it's really easy to feel like you're wandering through life. You can go to the gym and you can work out and you can be super healthy. You can go to the therapist and talk through all your feelings and you can be emotionally strong and stable. But if that third component, if the spirit center is off, to me, there's that's the what am I trying to spit out here? Like that is how I feel the most lost. I can deal with my physicality not being great. I can deal with my headspace being a little off from time to time. But when I don't feel connected to something bigger than myself,
Mm-hmm.
that's when it really starts to feel like it's unraveling for me. And um, that's why I know that that foundation that my parents gave me, the foundation that your mom and dad gave you, if for no other reason, it gave you a starting place. You know what I mean? Our parents put us they put us at the starting line at least. And they
Yeah.
gave us something. They gave us something to believe in. And then now I believe this, our role is to live your life and figure out what's true for you, what lands for you. Does this part land? Great. Does this part land? Great. Make your own salad, man. It doesn't have to look and taste like everybody else's. It just has to work for you in your life.
And you've got to have direction. As school teachers, we were directing our students all the time. They
Yeah.
they crave that. Well, guess what? The same thing that worked for my high school students works for adults. They crave
Amen.
direction and they crave guidance and they crave structure and they crave rules.
Yeah.
But I will say this, and my dad said this all the time, man has really messed up religion.
For
Man
sure.
man has really messed it up. It's so simple. And I remembered a podcast that might not have been a podcast. It might have been when Oprah had the show. She had a young boy, she had a young boy on, and then he passed, and he wanted her by his bedside when he died. And she says it was so impactful. It was so powerful because right before he died, what he said to her, because he saw something, he looked at her and said, "It's all so simple."
Mm.
And I have never forgotten that when I watched it. It had to be over 20 years ago. I watched Oprah telling the audience, "It's all so simple." And I thought, we complicate things because we're human, but we don't need to complicate the message of salvation. It's very
Yeah.
simple. So, anyway, we're wrapping up here, and I want
Okay.
people to be able to get in touch with you. And if there's any last things, I do like to end with this. Tell me something about your friend, your mom, your dad, really quickly, that you want people to know. Some it can be a pet peeve they had, it can be a favorite thing they had, it can be just what's the one thing that you remember most about your dad. For example, I would say my dad loved people. He just loved people. People he'd meet at a gas station, people he'd pick up as hitchhikers. He picked up hitchhikers. My dad loved people. So tell me something about your mom, dad, and your friend, and then how to get in touch with you if people want to get you to speak somewhere.
All right. I'll do it through storytelling. When I was about 11, no, maybe I was a little younger than that. Maybe I was like 7. So I grew up in Minnesota, and every kid in Minnesota plays hockey. That's pretty much how we come out of the womb. And practices were really early, like 5 a.m. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we would do is my dad would wake us up at 4:30 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays to go to hockey practice, and we would get dressed in our house. And we'd put all my gear on. He'd put me up on the kitchen counter, and he would tie my ice skates and put my guards on the bottom of them. And we'd walk to the car and go and practice. And one morning it was really early, and I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and he was tightening my skates. And for some reason, we didn't have the skate guard on at that particular moment, and usually we did. I did something, and I jerked, and I kicked my foot up, and I accidentally hit my dad right in the tooth, and I just clean as you can just knocked his tooth right out of his mouth.
Oh my God.
and and blood is flowing down his mouth. And my dad was the sweetest human being on planet Earth in that moment. He didn't get mad at me. He didn't yell at me. He didn't make me feel bad about what happened. He just had this attitude of, man, you know what? It happens. And he cleaned himself up a little bit. He took me to practice. And then I think he, ended up going and getting his thing taken care of. But I've never forgotten that lesson. And I've probably had to revisit that lesson 750 million times with my own children, you know, because
Yeah.
your kids can quote unquote kick your teeth out all the time. And how we react is going to say everything to them about who we really are and how we really feel about them. So that's one story that I love to share about my dad. He was just incredibly sweet. And my mom, however, was the disciplinarian in our family. She was the one who would whoop your butt and scream at you. And, she could really be pretty abusive. If we want to look at what that word abuse means here in 2025, like if we go back to the 80s, it was a full out abusive situation with the way that she handled things. But my mom was also incredibly supportive. And the story that I'll share about my mom just briefly is, I had a 28-year radio and television career. And there were a lot of times during those 28 years where I would bring up things about my mom and I's relationship in an effort to relate to my audience and just kind of share some anecdote about it. And she didn't always love that I brought up some of our less than colorful moments together as a a son and his mom. And she would there were times where she felt like I crossed the line. And I spoke about this in my eulogy that I gave at her funeral. Was, there were times where she felt like I crossed the line. But just like when I was a kid, even though that she would have these moments of abuse. She was also the first person that I could go to if I couldn't sleep at night. She was also the first person to give me a hug and tell me that she loved me. It was equal parts war and peace, if you will. And uh, I love how my mom taught me that I can support people even if I'm a little upset with them for a while. Like I can still be in their corner. So I think that's a really those are two great stories that I love to share about my parents because it really does encapsulate who they are.
What were their names?
Dan and Naomi.
I love
Yeah. And then, the story about my best friend that I'll share that is there. There's a million stories that I could share about Quoc. That was his name. He was a Vietnamese kid, and Quoc was, and probably still is, and maybe will only be the only person that I will ever meet in my life who I felt like saw every fiber of my being. We all, hopefully, if we're lucky enough, we get to find one or two people in our lifetimes where we can be authentically ourselves at every moment, even when that's messy.
Yeah.
And Quack always saw me, and I always saw him. Right, that was a two-way street with the two of us. That's why we were such kindred souls for each other. But I remember toward the end of his life, as he died from complications to colorectal cancer. It had spread in his body, and we were walking one time around a lake in Connecticut where he lived, and for whatever reason, man, he looked at me, Theo, and he said, "When you think nobody else in the world sees you, I just need you to know that I do." And I will never forget that as long as I live, because I spoke about it earlier. We were handed an opportunity to have a new relationship with people in death. Kwok will be able to see me my whole life. Gosh, I'm getting a little emotional right now thinking about it, but there are times where I feel like the world doesn't see me. There are times where I feel like, hey man, is anybody else seeing what's going on here? And I hear his voice in the back of my head, and that sweet man saying, when you think nobody else sees you, you just need to know that I do. And it really does bring me a sense of comfort.
Of course it does. And honestly, that's that's what we all want. It's just to be heard. And if you've got one person out there, Quack, if you've got one person that says
Right.
that to you, what a gift, what a treasure.
Huge,
Oh
huge.
my gosh. Yeah, you only need one. We only need one. And we only need to be that one for one person. Just be
Yeah.
that one. I
There's
was
there's
wondering if that was,
that's him right there. Yeah.
I love that. Well,
That's
he's,
us on one of our final trips together. I think he died about six months after that photo was taken.
wow.
I know.
What a gift. So you've got
Yeah.
three gifts right there, your dad and the kindness. And just as you were telling that story, I started thinking, have I been that way with my daughter? Have I bit her head off at times, when she was little, if she spilled something or wouldn't get ready on time? Or, we need to continue to remember that patience as a parent. And then your mom, that faithfulness to you and her faith. And then Quack, he sees you. You've been blessed with three beautiful gifts.
I think about it all the time. And
Yeah.
look, to anybody else who's in the thick of it right now and you can't find your way, I think if we gave anybody marching orders today, it would be, what are those three gifts? What are those two gifts? What is that single gift that person gave to you? And stop focusing so much on the pain and how you miss them and how you wish this and you wish that, and just say, what did they give me? What why am I better because of that person? That's
Yes,
just a much better headspace to sit in.
it is. As soon as you do that, it kind of flips the narrative.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're like, wow, I was blessed to have them. I was so blessed. A lot of people will go their whole lives and never get somebody to look at them and say, I see you.
Oh no.
What a blessing. And what a blessing for my audience that you got to come on the podcast today. And I thank you so much. And
Thank
how can
you.
people get in touch with you? I'm going to put it in the description, but how would you tell people to contact you if they wanted to shoot you an email?
Yeah, well, two ports of entry for me. If you're interested in the podcast that I do called Learn from People Who Lived It, you can simply go to learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com. We've got a website set up there to get you more information about the podcast. And then if you're interested in my speaking and what I do on stages, you just head on over to myname.com, which is Mathew Blades with one T, Mathew Blades, BLADES.com. And to anybody wondering why my very religious mom named me Mathew with one T, the story that I have is that her and my dad could not agree on a name unless it had a unique spelling. So there you go.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
That was a question that I've had and I just never asked it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
That's
thank
why
you.
that's why I'm Mathew.
Matthew with a T, with one T.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, hey, you're preaching to the choir with the name thing. So,
Yeah, I know. I know. I love that you have this podcast for people in this forum. And to anybody who's here right now, just feel the hug that we're giving you and just feel the warmth that we're trying to breathe into you because we understand very, very honestly what you're going through.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Matthew, and have a great rest of the week. And everybody, thanks for tuning in to Think Theo.